friends, I wanted to clarify something that I see a lot of people commenting on. For those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird, and I'm a biblical scholar. I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. I recently shared a couple videos related to Matthew chapter 19, verse 12, where Jesus talks about eunuchs. In those videos, I comment on how eunuchs were known or believed to be sexually active with both men and women, and they were spoken of in terms we today call non-binary. People have, understandably, been pushing back on both of those points. So I wanted to let you know that I have made an article available on my website. It's on the podcasts page of my website that delves into both of these things people are pushing back on. The link to that article is in the description of this video. The short version of what that article is going to tell you is that when we look at what people were saying about eunuchs in the ancient world, it is that they were adept at having sex with both men and women, and they were discussed in terms such as being a, quote, monstrous gender formation, or even a third sex of humanity. We have texts that say this. If you think that a man without testes cannot achieve an erection, I understand why you think that, but I have news for you. Some men who lose them after puberty can still achieve an erection. Okay? Also, saying that eunuchs cannot have sex suggests that sex is only defined with this previous idea in mind, that it's only defined as one person's erect penis in an orifice of their partner. That's kind of a limited way of thinking about sex, isn't it? So anyway, if you're interested, that's the main point in terms of responding to people's a very widely held belief about eunuchs, that they were celibate, which they were not, or not necessarily, right? And that thinking that talking beyond male-female is only a modern idea. It is not. Okay? So that's the main point here. If you want to keep watching or listening to this video, what I'm going to do next is read from a part of that article, just a couple parts of it, and then read from a part of chapter 3 of my book where I give you a little bit more clarification and engage the ideas a little bit more. Okay, so let's go over to the article. The part I wanted to read from the chapter, from the article. The confusion about how to understand or describe eunuchs can be seen even in the number of terms used to refer to them. The ancient world recognized at least two broad categories of eunuchs, those born so and those made so. The latter were described in a variety of ways. The Greek had approximately 7 terms used in semantic relation, meaning some sort of language using the word eunuch. And the Romans had even more than 7, all of which were based on various technologies of castration. So they were labeled according to which way they'd been castrated, essentially. This variety of terms was compounded by the varying results of different kinds of castration, as well as the effect of castration upon prepubescent, so before hitting puberty, versus post-pubescent males. That will then play out differently for those two bodies, right? With respect to prepubescent castration, certain physiological characteristics were widely known and stereotyped, including feminine and beardless faces, physical weakness, height, with womanish vocal characteristics. With respect to post-pubescent castration, however, many secondary sex characteristics associated with males would be maintained, making it extremely difficult for anyone in the ancient world to know for certain whether the man in front of him was a eunuch or not. The confusion that eunuchsism, the state of being a eunuch, created made the eunuch a particular lightning rod for male anxiety and an object of tremendous suspicion, particularly with respect to their morality. And this is why I find it really interesting that we then see these words put in Jesus's mouth, him commending that people make themselves a eunuch, right? I mean, he's challenging the idea around their morality as well. Generally, they were viewed as soft, and there's some Latin and Greek in the article for that, effeminate, several descriptions there, sexually passive, unkind, immodest, changeable, I imagine, fickle, okay, light-skinned, weak, impotent, deceitful, cowardly, and incapable of virtue. Popular novels depicted them as power-seeking, unscrupulous, greedy, untrustworthy, and undependable. A lesson attributed to Diogenes had him commenting upon an inscription over the door of a house of an evil eunuch that said, "Let nothing evil enter," by responding, "How then can the owner enter?" Dream interpretation, popular sayings, fables, even popular superstitions all viewed the eunuch as an object of scorn, bad luck, and deception. The eunuch, by definition, was not or could not be a morally upright and virtuous figure, but was always suspicious. Another part of the article says this. Men were constantly, in the ancient world, he does some description of some of the medical treatises out there and descriptions about medical beliefs at the time. And then Hester goes on to say, men were constantly threatened with the potential of becoming weak through a variety of activities, such as whether by bathing too much, or by eating the wrong foods, or by engaging in too much sex, by wearing the wrong clothing, even by taking too much enjoyment in unmanly tasks. Men were concerned about their loss of maleness, and the medical treatises of the time reflect the ways in which physicians sought to ensure their patrons' manliness. In this slippery slope of cultural and medical context of sexed identity, it was imperative that males invent certain practices, social, sexual, legal, martial, and political, that could help them clearly define their masculinity. One last little bit here. And in this setting, eunuchs were the nightmare embodiment of men's worst fears, right? Eunuchs had lost their masculinity. Unlike men, they were passive, performers of sexual pleasure, submissive, and were mounted, or they were the bottom in a sexual encounter. These features and aspects were usually attributed to females and enslaved peoples of both sexes, and, like them, eunuchs were branded infamia, so not legally recognized. Unlike women, however, they could clearly not give birth or suckle. Eunuchs were a monstrous identity formation. He's quoting from ancient writers, a source of sex-gender confusion. They were a tertium genus hominum, which is a third human sex. Okay, and the source for that second one is Historia Augusta in this section on Severus Alexander, 23.7. If you want to go look it up, you can look it up online. I just did. Okay, so that's from the article that I was using to write, in chapter 3, and I comment on how it's just really quite difficult to convey in this book how far-reaching and how important it is, how far-reaching the implications are of what Jesus is attributed with saying, right? And so I do my best in this chapter to share that with you all. So let me read from chapter 3, starting on page 56. It is difficult to convey just how shocking Jesus' comment about eunuchs, right? There's some people born eunuchs, there's some people made eunuchs by others, there's some who choose to make themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. Let anyone accept this who can. That's what Jesus is attributed with saying. Allow me to quote at length from an article by J. David Hester in order to show you just how complex this short reference seems to be. Real talk about eunuchs makes it clear why they challenge the familiar male-female gender binary, and suggests that they were perceived to be surprisingly lacking in celibacy as well. So brace yourself. And I quote from a very long paragraph here. Both ancient religious practices and the earliest Christian reception of this saying in Matthew 19:12 understood the call for eunuchsism to be a literal act of religious devotion with profound social gender consequences. The eunuch was a figure perceived to be neither celibate nor morally chaste, but was a monstrous gender formation. He's quoting the ancient texts there, he's not claiming that, whose ability to navigate within and take on properties of both masculine or male and feminine or female worlds, physically, sexually, socially, culturally, even politically, was the source of his/her ambivalent status. It was only several centuries later, under the guidance of aristocratic bishops, that the eunuch was transformed into a symbol of masculine ascesis and superiority. Ascesis means renunciation of the world and severe self-control, right? Thus becoming a means by which to reinforce the very heterosexist structure it transgressed. This is hard to track with if you're not, just sometimes it's hard to track if you're not reading it. Let me read that again. It was only several centuries later, under the guidance of these bishops, that the eunuch was transformed into a symbol of renunciation. Right? Renunciation of sex. Thus becoming a means by which to reinforce the very heterosexist structure it transgresses. Right? Okay? Modern interpreters perpetuating the celibate reading of this text do so without recourse to the significant socio-historical gender norm data of the ancient Mediterranean world. More importantly, however, such modern interpreters undermine the power and radicality of this saying and its critique of both our cherished assumptions regarding human sexuality and the importance of normative heterosexism as a religious ideal. Both of those are challenged by Jesus upholding a eunuch. So, again, if you want to keep listening, I'm going to read a few paragraphs that kind of unpack everything that was in that particular paragraph. As Hester alludes to, there were other religious traditions in the first century Common Era that incorporated literal castration as a form of devotion, primarily by the priests therein. We also have evidence of Christian men as early as the mid-2nd century who took this comment literally, castrating themselves for the sake of the kingdom, as Jesus says to do. By the beginning of the 4th century, it was common enough to compel some church leaders to act to curb the practice officially. The men called together for the First Ecumenical Council, the Council of Nicaea, which was in 325, Common Era, made their stance on the matter clear in the very first canon or decision from that council. A lot of people in churches will read or recite the Nicene Creed. Right. So the very first decision they made is not what people read in church. There's a whole list of things that they decided about Jesus' divinity. But the very first decision they made was choosing in one's right mind to be castrated disqualified you for leadership in the church. Make no mistake about it. For the first several centuries of the Christian tradition, this statement was taken quite literally. When Hester refers to a eunuch as embodying a, quote, monstrous gender formation, he is quoting one specific ancient source for that descriptor. However, it is an appropriate representation of numerous other ancient sources that offer commentary about eunuchs. The heart of the matter on the gender piece is twofold. First, what kind of a man can one be without testes? Yes, if your mind leaps to that crass phrase or taunt, grow a pair, directed at someone who is not living up to a certain standard of courage, then you are tracking with the ancient beliefs as well. Suffice it to say that many of the beliefs that people are trying to dismantle today that comprise a toxic masculinity were standards in many ancient Western contexts and writings. Some of the more pernicious beliefs of this revered form of masculinity include expecting a man to be able to dominate over another, both physically and sexually, be the penetrator, never the penetrated, and to embody traits that are associated with high levels of testosterone running through a person's veins, such as being tough and strong and assertive and violent and, well, manly. The second and intertwined prong of why a eunuch might be described as a monstrous gender formation is due to the behaviors that have been deemed soft throughout the centuries that are now likely to be part of their embodiment, and because all things soft, passive, and receptive are deemed to be feminine. A man who behaves like a woman is unsettling in a world so structured by the gender binary construct. Effeminacy is abhorrent to a true man. Choosing to be passive or the recipient in a sex act, this is not something that a real man would ever subject himself to. These, too, are beliefs that many people still hold. Whether in the ancient context or today's, they all stem from the belief that there are two clear options in terms of gender, and the one ascribed to women is inferior to that ascribed to men. Yes, at the heart of calling a eunuch a gender monstrosity is a hatred for women. While many ancient males wrote about their disgust for humans who had lost or chose to remove their privileged status as a male, and now embodied elements of both parts of the male-female gender binary, they were also telling us that there was a noteworthy presence of such humans. It is from this angle that I suggest that we read Jesus' comments. He too acknowledges an embodiment beyond the male-female gender binary, and in a way that makes such humans visible and honors them. Maybe we should be extending that phrase about the sinners whom Jesus hung out with to be tax collectors, sex workers, and now eunuchs. Next, Hester notes that it took a few centuries before the traditional handling of this passage became one of spiritualizing what Jesus said, spinning a reference to literal castration into a metaphorical one about celibacy. Given the number of men I've watched squirm in their seats when the discussion of circumcision or castration comes up in a class, which it does stunningly often, by the way, I have no problem believing that most men would rather take these comments metaphorically than literally. But just because someone might prefer that reading does not make it the best reading, now does it? Finally, Hester comments on what is quite evident in both biblical scholarship and in Christian settings, where this passage might be up for discussion. Whatever a person's reasons for wanting to read the references to eunuchs metaphorically, this person is neglecting copious amounts of evidence that suggest it was a literal comment. This person is also avoiding dealing with the radicality of these comments by Jesus, in that they challenge two pillars of heteronormativity. One, the belief that the only natural or approved of expression of sexuality happens between a man and a woman, and two, that people do fall quite neatly into one of two gender categories, male or masculine and female or feminine. In other words, when people read these words of Jesus metaphorically, which is to say that he was encouraging sexual renunciation, they keep the focus on male and female couples and on heterosexuality. They end up reinforcing the very heteronormative ideas that these comments, originally understood, directly challenge. And at the bottom of page 59 to the top of page 60. In case you've not taken the time to process this element about men who no longer have testes, just because a man cannot procreate has never meant that he was also uninterested in sex or unable to perform a range of sex acts with partners. In fact, this was a large part of the allure of the eunuch throughout the ages. I'm quoting from the article, "Eunuchs were universally characterized by the frequency, ease, and adeptness with which they performed sex acts with both men and women." End quote. Please do consider, as well, the women who have appreciated the fact that men castrated after puberty often maintain an ability for an erection, while offering the reliable inability to procreate. It is quite revealing, then, that many people today believe that a plain reading of the reference to eunuchs is a metaphor for celibacy and even for ascetic lifestyles. To be clear, the belief about sexual abstinence is built upon two faulty presuppositions. So the belief that this comment attributed to Jesus is about not having sex, that belief is built on two faulty starting points, right? First, that the only purpose of sex is procreation, and thus removing the gonads must also disqualify this person for sex more broadly. And second, that penis and vagina sex is the only form there is, a belief that even most heterosexual couples would challenge, and I would encourage you to expand your horizons if you don't already challenge that. A person who claims that a reference to eunuchs is a metaphor for celibacy, whether consciously or not, is contributing to not just a denial of historical realities, but also to quite limited views of sexuality and its purpose in human relationships. Whatever Jesus' reasons for doing so, he specifically attests to an alternative form of sexuality, as well as a third or fluid option for gender. And neither of these things are things that need to be fixed or repented of. That's it for today. My mini story time or response to people's understandable comments about eunuchs. Understandable comments, but they are also misinformed, underinformed comments about eunuchs in the ancient world. Thanks for watching. I hope you found something helpful here, and I'll see you next time.